What's that saying about things you're waiting for never actually happening? A watched pot is right twice a day, or a bird in the hand never boils, you know the one I mean. Anyway, your dad's tin pot pub philosophy to one side, I'd find it hard to argue that the universe actually rewards your enthusiasm. By and large, if you really want something, it'll conspire to make sure it never actually happens. This was true when the Spice Girls reformed this month and I couldn't get tickets, but it's almost always true in WWE, an organization that genuinely seems to grow a big rubbery one over the idea of crushing the dreams of its audience, deliberately or otherwise. My name is Adam Cleary and these are 10 WWE moments everyone was waiting for that never happened. Number 10. Finn Balor's Universal title rematch. With the quiet exception of Wilborn beating myself and Pacitti on a WhatCulture Twitch stream during his initial 2-week trial, nobody has had such a misleadingly strong start in wrestling quite like Finn Balor on the main roster. In his first match after his call-up, he beat Roman Reigns clean, then at his first pay-per-view, he beat Seth Rollins to become the first ever WWE Universal Champion. There has never been a debut like it, but sadly an injury sustained in that match put him on the shelf for nearly 6 months. His return in April last year inevitably begged the question about when he'd be reinstated into the main event, and given the title rematch he was very obviously due, but it just never materialized. Instead, it took 2 whole months for him to even get a #1 contenders fatal 5-way before being put into a bafflingly bad program with Bray Wyatt. He worked Kane, he worked Goldust, he worked the Miz Taraj, and it wasn't until August 2018, 1 day short of the 2-year anniversary of him actually winning the thing, that he got another crack at the belt. A rematch of sorts, yes, but would one on his return have been too much to ask for? Number 9. The Rock versus Shawn Michaels. In what was, at the time, the biggest moment in SmackDown history at that point, being as it was the first episode, a returning Shawn Michaels screwed The Rock out of winning the WWF Championship. Actually, can we just take a moment to appreciate the camera work on this? Despite HBK looking like he's rollerblading down a beach in Tenerife trying to sell you tickets to a nightclub that doesn't exist, you somehow entirely forget he's there until bang! Super kick goodbye. Having done Rock Triple H to death at this point, fans the world over gleefully took this as A. Michaels was coming out of retirement full time, and B. he was going to work The Rock, the man who had defined the previous era in the company versus the man who was starting to define this. But then, nothing. No match, no real follow-up to it, a huge moment in WWE went precisely nowhere. I mean, we'd later learn that the pair absolutely hated each other because Michaels had been a dick to The Rock's gran, but still, total bummer. Number 8. A bad NXT takeover. My criteria for this list was that I wouldn't include anything that could still happen, and I guess it is very possible that one day we're going to get a bad one, but crucially, nobody's actually waiting for it anymore. And that's the real testament to NXT TakeOver's success, I think. After the first run of jaw-dropping shows, the question was always, can they somehow keep this streak going? The modest Full Sail shows that comprised the first 5 exceeded expectations, and from there, things just got ridiculous. Brooklyn had that Balor-Owens ladder match, Respect was Bayley Sasha's Iron Woman, Dallas had Nakamura's debut, The End had one of the greatest tag team matches I've ever seen, Brooklyn 2 had that DIY match, and then we all just stopped asking the question. In the 12 months between Brooklyn and Brooklyn 2, the headlines around NXT TakeOver weren't about them being surprisingly good, merely that the overall standard of the product was stupidly high. Sure, there might be a stinker in the pipeline somewhere, but none of us are waiting for it anymore, and that's the point. Number 7. Crown Jewel getting cancelled. 10:30 PM was the time I sat around WhatCulture Towers that night waiting for them to cancel Crown Jewel. Article effectively written, just needing a few specifics and a swift smash of the publish button. Video script in largely a similar state with the studio entirely prepped for me. 10:30 PM, not a glamorous industry. Yes, despite everybody knowing they were going to stop Crown Jewel, and indeed many online outlets actually reporting they were going to stop Crown Jewel, they did not stop Crown Jewel. Instead, pressing ahead with it despite the immense criticism from fans and pressure from advertisers. I mean, yes, in hindsight, binning off a massive show at little over a week's notice when stages, production, logistics, catering, travel, accommodation, and marketing had all likely been paid for was probably a contractual impossibility, but still, still, the situation sort of demanded it. Instead, we got the show largely as intended, albeit with all reference to Saudi Arabia removed and every single slider on the banter scale shoved all the way to 11, because Shane McMahon is apparently the best in the world. Number 6, Sting versus The Undertaker. I'll get to the invasion properly in a bit, but can we all just take a moment to agree that when we fantasy booked WWF versus WCW, the one match we all had in common was this: Undertaker versus Sting. If you didn't, well, I mean, who do you think you are, Vince Russo? In an era when wrestling was slowly moving towards more believable, relatable gimmicks like Austin hating his boss or Angle being an Olympian, that sort of thing, these were the two big lads who were still absurd. A big goth who would fly in from the ceiling and a man who was literally dead. But when Sting didn't come across with WCW's other big names like Chris Kanyon, Hugh Morris, and Chronic, I know, I can't believe this thing was a letdown either, the match looked like it might never happen. Sadly, in the years since, their paths never managed to fully cross, even when Sting did finally make his debut for WWE in 2015. That said, though, he has gone on record to state with his actual mouth that a match with the dead man is his only unfinished business in wrestling. Don't count on it, though. Number 5, Shane to take over WWE. Yeah, speaking of the invasion, the one thing above everything else that it sort of suggested was that one day, Vinnie Mac would tire of all this nonsense and sell up. Say goodbye to all the oil and the drama and the booing and just retire to his own private island where a different beautiful woman would suck each and every one of his toes. But as the years and years and years and years and admittedly years and years and years rolled by, Vince was unmoving in his role as the Big Dick. Shane moved on to other things, and it turned out that his favourite son was in fact Steph, obviously perceiving her balls to be bigger than Shane's, either metaphorically or literally, I'll let you decide which. Even upon his return to the company for what actually looked like a long-awaited power struggle angle, he promptly found himself feuding with wrestlers instead. The Undertaker, AJ Styles, Kevin Owens, all merely wannabes compared to the literal best in the world. Number 4, CM Punk at All In. Is there anything on this earth that would spice up your life more than a CM Punk return? I mean, look, we've debated at length whether it's actually a good idea, and spoiler, it probably isn't, but still, can you imagine how good things would feel, even if just for a moment, if he returned? Walking back into WWE might still one day happen, but if there ever was a time a return felt actually probable, it was this year. All In, the biggest celebration of independent wrestling ever conceived, being organised by people he actually liked and taking place in his hometown. Surely, this was it. But alas, no. Despite appearing at the fan convention the day before, Punk was nowhere to be seen on the actual night itself. 5 or 6 times during the show, I shot excitedly to the ramp, anticipating a surprise appearance, but not once did Cult of Personality hit. A shame, really, as this could have been the moment to rekindle the great man's love of the industry. Oh well. Number 3, Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania. Some people will tell you that Hogan versus Bret Hart was the one everyone's waiting for, but I've actually run this through my magical little machine and hang on. Yep, it says here that it's not. In the 1980s, Hogan and Flair were the two biggest stars in the entire wrestling world. One was the big name in WWF, the other in WCW / the entire rest of the world. When the latter finally joined WWF in 1991, everyone assumed it was so they could finally deliver the Hogan-Flair WrestleMania main event that everybody had fantasy booked for years. From his very debut, Flair even went after Hogan with his promos and his action, signaling a build to the match that would take the better part of a year. Then, oh mama, WWF just scrapped the idea and we got Hogan versus Justice, which was weird. We did actually get the match in WCW in 1994, but it wasn't on the grandest stage of them all. Number 2, the John Cena heel turn. Ask John Cena himself, and I mean obviously I do, because as a global wrestling personality, he is in my inner circle of close personal friends and confidants, and he will tell you that this already actually happened. Look, here he is talking directly to me, and definitely not GQ. Anyway, thousands and thousands of people chanting John Cena sucks is one thing, but the actual bona fide heel turn is quite another. At the height of his powers, Cena was in a repetitive cycle of defending the WWE against groups that would seek to harm it, and this was, let's face it, grounds for a heel turn more fertile than Ric Flair's bedsheets in the 80s. He could have been recruited by Bray Wyatt, he could have embraced the hate with Kane, he could have joined the Nexus for real, he could have beaten the streak, he could have done a double turn with Orton, but he just never ever did. WWE instead going full Viva Forever on Tweener Cena. Number 1, a WCW invasion. Yes, I know, technically this did happen, but it just didn't, did it? Like, when you actually think about it, every single wrestling fan in the 90s fantasy booked a war between the WWF and WCW. The clashes were epic, the matchups were mouth-watering, and that is not what we got. Owing to the absurd contractual stipulations of WCW's top stars, your Goldbergs, your Stings, your Hogans, Halls, and Nashes were nowhere to be seen during this angle. Instead, we got the likes of Chris Kanyon, Hugh Morris, and Chronic, and I cannot believe I've had to say that twice in one list. The big lads did all eventually make their way over in time, but by then, the WCW was long dead, and an invasion angle was a bitter, disappointing memory. Yes, we finally got the 2 become 1 story we'd all been waiting for, but not the proper inter-promotional war we'd long craved.